There are a few games I wish I could experience for the first time again, and one of those is Dead Space. Dead Space was released almost 13 years ago, and it was so immersive and terrifying that I always considered it my favorite survival horror game. I loved Resident Evil and Silent Hill like many, but Dead Space took things to the next level with advances in gameplay, graphics, movements, and a deep, deep sense of immersion that was rare to find. But does it really hold up after all this time has gone by? Dead Space has you take control of a man named Isaac who's trapped on a dark, creepy spaceship in the quiet deadness of space. The entire game takes place on the Ishimura, overrun by alien creatures called necromorphs. Violent, gruesome, and twisted, they're out to rip Isaac to shreds as he attempts to fix the spaceship and uncover the mystery of what happened. This man-escape ship premise is as basic as you can get for a plot, and that's really what makes it so refreshing. Simple things done right tend to be the best in life, and Dead Space is no exception. Clouded, bogged down, and mired our games often become. More mechanics, more story threads, more this, more that, more features, more whatever. It just leads to unfocused games that can feel confused and stretched way too thin. Dead Space is literally the opposite. This is a game that provides one of the most tightly packaged experiences you can find. Literally, this ship is the whole game. The character cast is small, and the gameplay mechanics are minimal yet very refined, and that's exactly what makes Dead Space so special. By revolving the game entirely around this one goal in place, they were able to focus on making an experience that knows exactly what it is, and there are 5 elements to this experience, starting with the fantastic user interface. Dead Space's UI succeeds not because it's sleek and minimalist, which it is, but more so because it's entirely diegetic. There are no on-screen indicators here, everything exists in the actual game of Dead Space. Isaac's health bar is physically placed into his suit. His stasis levels are located right next to it. The oxygen meter is above it. When you pull up the menu, it's a hologram that emits from Isaac's helmet. The store, the workbench, video calls, the map, and anything else Isaac interacts with is fully integrated inside the game. Even ammo counts for your guns are only visible should Isaac aim down the sights of one of his weapons. It is a functional, completely in-game interface. The point of an internal UI is to get us to feel the richness of a world while reducing the contrivances that sometimes block us from being able to do so. Dead Space does this so naturally because according to the game, any interfacing is done by not necessarily the player but Isaac, and this is an important thing to distinguish. Research has been made on the effects of these environmental-based UIs with the use of eye tracking, and it's been confirmed that players typically have lower rates of eye movement, fixation, and pupil dilation when it features one of these interfaces. This implies that players have more focused attention spans, from which we can infer that they are more likely immersed in the actual game they're playing. A traditional user interface disperses tremendous amounts of information on the screen, which can cause players to lose focus on the game that they're playing because they're so preoccupied and distracted, hence the increased movements and eye patterns. This is not the case with Dead Space, and it's no surprise it's been used as reference material for many of these research papers. So our screen in Dead Space then becomes a window into an experience that is not only incredibly engrossing, but also one that allows us to block out that artificiality that pulls us away from that feeling. This is a critical feature of some of the best survival games for a variety of reasons. The immersion factor is of course one. Nothing breaks down the illusion of a game more than health bars, the pause button, or a menu that freezes the actual motion of the game in place. If we can ever remove these barriers while still providing all the information a player needs, then we should consider it, especially in a game that hedges on suspense. That's because suspense is amplified when user interface elements are real-time, as they remove the safety net from the player. Having to physically access the inventory to use a stasis pack or pick out the right health kit in combat while monsters are about to rip your head off is insanely stressful, and frankly it makes encounters even more engaging. So ultimately the UI helps keep the fear factor present while freeing up the player from having to take their attention off the game. And you will not want to, because Dead Space is one of the most intoxicating and cohesively designed games. The Ishimura is a maze of carefully crafted rooms, hallways, elevators, and offshoot paths tied together by a tram station which acts as both the beginning and end of each level. It's haunting inside Dead Space, reminiscent of Ridley Scott's Alien. The hallways are littered with blood, debris, and detritus from a ship left vacant, drifting through the void. Space is tight, and the field of view is extremely narrow. You feel squished and claustrophobic walking through each level, and its tight quarters make maneuvering difficult. Enemies break through walls and crawl in air vents above Isaac, leaving shadows toying on the ceiling. You hear things in Dead Space. Noises. A sound of a wrench clanking on the ground, a scuffle behind you, the soft groan of the ship hull, a creaking pipe, choking, gurgling, moaning, screaming. You may hear a distant clang or puff of smoke coming from the bows of the ship, muffled by Isaac's hoarse breathing. Is it a monster about to crash through the wall? Did I really just hear something, or not? Since necromorphs traverse through the ship's vents and at times jolt out from the floors and above you, the sounds put you on edge and add a constant level of tension throughout the entire game. One of the great choices in sound design was to have everything except the ambient noises sound very, very loud. I'm referring here to the shrill jump scare sounds, the shrieks of the enemies, and most importantly, the deafening sound of Isaac's weapons. Why do you think this is important in a game like Dead Space? Well, let me ask another way. If you can't hear anything under the backdrop of a screeching saw blade ripping through the flesh of a monster as he screams bloody murder, what can you not hear? Well, of course, the other monster coming from behind. Often in combat, blaring sounds will mask their footsteps and bellows, which makes you even more paranoid. This encourages players to study their environments well and keep on the move, making sure they're not being flanked or backing themselves into a corner that they can't escape. The game wants you to feel trapped and paranoid, and uses this incredible sound design to make you truly feel like you are Isaac, walking through a real ship, surviving for your life in a terrifying place. Take for example a hallway to the engine room. This could have been a very bog-standard, ordinary hallway, but just listen to the noise of this room in Dead Space. It is absolutely terrifying. Dead Space's advanced use of lighting for its time really makes the ship come to life far beyond what you'd imagine for a game made in 2008. The darks are pitch black, the whites are almost as bright as fluorescent, and everything acts in a realistic dynamic fashion. It's this contrast of light and dark that makes the lighting system beautiful and quite evocative as lights and shadows move and dance around the screen based on the source object. This swish dynamic light system was a huge leap forward not for just the survival horror genre that once had to settle for very static lighting, but many other games as well, like Portal 2, which came out a few years after Dead Space. You can really see a huge difference from games like Resident Evil 4 to Dead Space, and it absolutely adds to the immersion of the game. And as a bonus, the low lighting helps curb low resolution textures, which makes the game extremely playable and nice to look at even after all this time. Note that Dead Space achieved this with 0 loading screens within each level, smartly preloading upcoming areas while the player rides elevators, which also smartly act as jump scare moments. Is there anything more classic than when a game presents a safe area and then proceeds to let you know that you're never going to be safe in one again? Now, design-wise, Dead Space's greatest achievement is that it makes you feel lost and afraid on a huge, terrifying ship, even though you're actually on a very deliberate, linear path inside a very small video game area. A real place. Not a video game world full of assets dropped into a computer program. This is a ship that looks, navigates, sounds, and feels just like a real ship would. Nothing more and nothing less. And it's in that consistency and simplicity that Dead Space makes you feel grounded into a game like few others can. One can imagine how hard it might be to create a dense, very dense world inside a very small amount of actual square feet, and they nailed it with this game. Each level has the player complete one core task inside a specific area of the ship while navigating from the tram station to their objective. Isaac can either follow the optional player-triggered breadcrumb trail, which acts as a navigational system, or freely explore the ship with the help of the holographic map. The level design incorporates multiple forks in the road and locked doors in each level that the player can use to find items, but because enemies can crash through the walls or ambush Isaac at any moment, it's up to the player how far they should venture off the beaten path. Encounters are almost always frantic and scrappy, and typically end with Isaac on low health and ammo, so smart use of resources and diligent exploration is paramount. So a wonderful game loop emerges, as you wander the dark, cramped halls of the Ishimura, trying to find everything you can to survive, but maybe not go too far into the blackness. Fearful of the jump scares, the surprise attacks, and what lurks in the next room, hoping to find more upgrade materials and credits to buy weapons. As you stay protective over your health bar, it's a balancing act that is put entirely in the hands of the player, which makes it pretty damn rewarding and engrossing as you conquer each chapter. On a side note, I really love how medkits come in 3 different sizes, which means you'll need to make sure you're using your healing as effective as you can without losing the tail end of the kit. Because Isaac can upgrade his total HP value and medkits don't scale alongside it, those ratios change throughout the game, which forces more decision making. Just something small I wanted to note. Arguably the best part about Dead Space, though, is the exceptional combat, which is based around skill, precision, and environmental awareness, and it's damn intense and fun. Every third-person shooter needs great weapons. Many fail to provide on this fundamental caveman-level feature, instead offering pea shooters or guns we've used 1,000 times before. That's boring. Dead Space centers around dismemberment and provides some really well-designed weapons. The Ripper is a great example of a sophisticated video game mechanic that is very much welcome. The Ripper shoots out a saw blade that players control in real time, which is already pretty badass, but the catch is that the blade hitbox acts on a double axis. This means that the skill is derived not just from pointing to the target limb you want to cut off, but also correctly lining up where the blade is located on the horizontal axis. Essentially, you need to both aim where you want the blade to spin and make sure it's at the correct distance from Isaac. This is achieved by moving Isaac forwards or backwards in the game space to keep the saw spinning at just the right distance while aiming it vertically. If he's not at the right distance, the saw just won't connect with your target. By itself, it's a great mechanic worthy of a great game, which it already is, but it shines even brighter thanks to the aforementioned level design of Dead Space. Dead Space is cramped. There's boxes, corpses, and shit to trip over everywhere. Isaac's suit is heavy and his ass fat, so trying to move around the ship while enemies are coming at you from 360 degrees makes combat very hectic. You have to deal with so many factors: enemy placements, movement patterns, the space you're in, environmental hazards, etc., all while being contained in tight quarters. With scarce resources and limited ammunition, there's a lot to think about. Now try using the Ripper in these scenarios. It's even harder, which makes getting good with it very rewarding, not to mention create unique gameplay scenarios that can be tackled in so many ways. Dead Space does a great job ramping up difficulty, and this is achieved by introducing a constant stream of new enemies, 14 total over the course of the game. Enemies are not copy-pasted zombie reskins. Every necromorph has a unique gameplay mechanic that Isaac can identify and use its corresponding counter. Some run fast at you, some explode, some spawn little baby aliens if you shoot them in the wrong spot, some have weak points, some revive, some shoot projectiles, some ambush you from above. There's a weapon that works best for each type of enemy. This broadens the skill ceiling of the game for those who can figure out these counters, and for those that don't, the plasma cutter makes for a perfect all-in-one on medium difficulty, so it works out either way. The plasma cutter by itself is another great example of a gameplay mechanic that is properly thought out. This weapon has 3 vertical reticules that can be flipped on the alternate fire mode to line up horizontally rather than vertically. This is not just some meaningless integration. This means that if the player wants potential extra damage, they can use the vertical mode to try to line up more reticules for more damage, or if they don't want to, they can flip it to the horizontal mode to guarantee damage by lining up just 1 or 2 of the dots. So again, there's this element of skill and precision that goes far beyond the pointing and shooting other survival horror games offered in the past, and frankly, far into the future too. The best part about the combat though is that it escalates dramatically throughout the game as combinations of various enemies get mixed, and these encounters require unique tactics that make the game feel fresh as the hours go on and on. The stasis module gets put to great use in these encounters, which allows Isaac to slow enemies to a crawl based off where he fires it. This in itself is the core gameplay pillar of Dead Space, of course, as you can freeze one enemy while taking care of another, or hit someone's weak spots, or isolate an enemy from a pack, or just escape if you need to. Again, as always, the resource is limited though, which means you'll need to use it sparingly and smartly, which can be said for pretty much everything in the game. As such, Dead Space turns out to be a very circular-natured game. Everything builds on everything else. As the combat difficulty increases and enemy combinations get harder, you need to upgrade your suit and weapons more, which means you'll need to find upgrade materials, which means you need to explore more, which means you need to fight more, which means you need to go off the beaten path more, which reinforces the core gameplay loop again and again and again. You feel locked into a very cohesive game that, again, knows exactly what it is, what it wants to offer without ramming unnecessary content down players' throats. I talk a lot about padding in my videos and how it can get in the way of a game's core pacing. In Dead Space, I never get the feeling that my time is being wasted. It's really the perfect length, and at no point did I ever feel that I had to slog through anything just because they wanted to increase the runtime of the game. And because the game is broken down into chapters, it's really easy to pick up and play because you always have a clear goal that you know will take under 40 minutes. However, 13 years later, I beat it in 2 sittings. It's incredibly rare for me to play a game for more than a few hours at a time, so to get so completely lost in a very old game for 6 hours at a time twice in the same week just about never happens for me. I can attribute this to many things, as I previously discussed. The art direction is just wonderful, the sound design is incredible, the gameplay is so much more sophisticated than I expected from a survival horror game, and the same could be said about the controls. Gone is the tankiness of Resident Evil that made you feel like a stiff wooden box. Dead Space feels like a proper action game. It's slick, has great responsiveness, and the movement is intuitive. Honestly, it's way ahead of its time compared to what was available at the time in this genre. The story by itself is mysterious and captivating. The puzzles are logical, and it makes sense for Isaac since he's an engineer. He's fixing stuff. He has these inherent skill sets. And the game has some really cool zero-gravity sections that are really quite impressive. Near the end of the game, Dead Space combines a lot of these elements really well inside these eerie, muffled rooms, forcing you to solve puzzles, manage your oxygen, and fight off enemies at the same time. It's nothing mind-blowing, but for this particular genre at this time in history, I'm really shocked at how well everything was incorporated. It just shows how much thoughtfulness was put into this game, and I'm sure the development team was incredibly passionate when they made Dead Space. Dead Space is unpredictable and a truly engrossing survival horror game with some great gameplay mechanics. If you ever wanted to feel like what it would be to be trapped on an infested spaceship, Dead Space will give you that experience like no other. It's not perfect. The turret section is lame, and Nicole was awkwardly shoehorned in. The game relies a little bit too much on the jump scare trope as well, which can be seen as a negative. But those minor flaws don't in any way take away from how great the game is. It's eye-opening to look back to see what our games looked like decades ago, and Dead Space gives us a snapshot into a window of that other world. It was developed in a time where many game developers were given the green light to make exotic, creative, and risky games. Many of those, if pitched today, would never see the light of day. But back then, funding was available to make these niche titles that we look fondly back upon. And I think Dead Space is an example of one of those great moments in gaming history. As time went on, Dead Space evolved into new directions, some good and some bad. The original will forever be remembered as a game that had a great idea, and one that got the support it needed to bring that idea to life in the most awesome of ways. And unlike a lot of games, it aged like a fine wine, perfectly playable today. Despite our horrific PC ports, which is almost as scary as the Ishimura itself, Dead Space is the cream of the crop and an absolute treat to play even 13 years later. So if you haven't played Dead Space, you need to do so.